Dunelm do a nice millionaire shortbread in their cafe. And while you're there, you can watch people making bad bedding choices, so it's win-win. This isn't a sponsorship slot, it's more of a cry for help. But that's Monstrosities Mon Amour, the show where otherwise overlooked places remove their spectacles, shake their hair down and reveal they were beautiful all along. Today, as I was buying some bedding in Dunelm, I was clonked over the head by someone I had no surprise owns an Austen maxi, cultural commentator Travis Elborough. Travis has written books on everything from the Route Master bus, vinyl records, spectacles and seaside resorts. And when I came to, lo and behold, we were on a seafront somewhere. Travis, what the actual flip? Where the hell are we?
We are in sunny Sussex by the seaside, West Sussex to be exact, and in Worthing in West Sussex. And we're on the seafront and we are just off Marine Parade, which obviously sounds very aquatic and elegant and stuff, but we are actually at the Grafton Street car park, which is a sort of edifice of the Worthing seafront that many people, including the local papers and councillors, refer to as an eyesore.
Lovely. Just exactly the kind of place I want to hear about. So you're from Worthing, aren't you?
I am, yeah, and I have quite fond memories of this car park, really. I have a particularly vivid memory, actually, of us driving up into it, my dad's Ford Escort, and being on the radio, Dwayne Eddy's Dance to the Guitar Man playing probably on Radio 2, given my parents' taste, and that would have been in the sort of later 70s. And for some reason, it's just the reverberation of Dwayne Eddy's guitar combined with the cavernous interior of a multi-storey car park and driving up those levels has just remained deeply imprinted in my brain to this day.
It's funny how places can be really, really evoked by music or books or, like a very strong kind of cultural memory like that, isn't it? Almost when you hear that piece of music, it will take you back there.
Also I have later memories as well of my friend Aidan, who had a 1961 Ford Popular with a tape deck in it. And a bit later we'd drive into town and there's a couple of pubs on the seafront we used to. One's no longer there because that's been knocked down, obviously, and flats have been erected on that spot too. And he, either the Ramones or Hawkwind in this particular era. But there was also a car which was often parked in that car park. I can't remember actually which type of car it was now. I think it might have been an 1100 or something like that. But it had someone had sprayed on the back of it, Toya, in the Toya logo, as was from the sort of sheep farming in Barnet era Toya, and this was in about 1988, so somewhat old hat to have Toya sprayed on your car. So again, there's portals of sound and time that somehow or other this car park contains for me. I mean, obviously this is not just a kind of nostalgic exercise in romanticism of concrete and sound, but I think it's for me, obviously it's a very evocative space, and also views out from the fourth story across out at the seafront end of the sea as well.
Where the car park is, you're sort of directly behind the lido, aren't you?
Pretty much.
There's a big wheel now, a bit further down, and the pier beyond that. So we've got all the sort of splendour. And then further down Marine Parade, we've got lots of beautiful Georgian terraces. We've got next door to the car park, there's a massive Marks and Spencer's that was sort of expanded in the late 60s, apparently by John Harris, who was the architect who did the master plan for Dubai in the 60s. Yeah.
It's called Knightsbridge House. There's some flats above the Marks and Spencers. And they're both these new additions, which I suppose were indicative of the sort of thrusting vision for Worthing of the late 60s and into the early 70s, where, I suppose the thrill of being able to park right on the seafront and take in the ozone, mixing with obviously all the carbon monoxide fumes of your car, somewhat. But I mean, there are sort of many examples of seafront car parks. I mean, some of the most famous one of the most interesting ones is the Sydney Little car parks in Hastings, which are actually subterranean car parks, and the concrete on the front. Obviously, that's an interwar collection of buildings. There is a kind of marine heritage of these types of buildings, but obviously it's not, on the whole, what most people think about when they think of a Regency seafront. I mean, Brighton, again, a bit further along the coast, the car park there I think it is actually in Regency Square, is a subterranean one, so that so the square, the splendour of the Georgian Square, isn't disturbed by the car park. Whereas obviously this is an intrusion into the landscape. But then at the same time, so was the pier when it was first created, and there's this fantastic Constable painting of the original chain pier in Brighton, and it looks like something out of the Tripods. It's just landed on this rather rustic scene. So I think we forget that the seaside and the seafront was modern and new. I mean, there used to be a hotel, the Beach Hotel on Worthing Seafront, which was a beautiful sort of deco frontage from the 1930s, which again was demolished not too long ago. And Grafton Street, I think, is emblematic of a 60s Worthing, quite a bit of which is already gone. And I actually do genuinely think it's an interesting addition to the seafront. It has a slightly Colosseum feel about it, I feel, a concrete Colosseum, admittedly. And then at the moment, there's an upper level part which has been used as a kind of restaurant bar space in a similar way to perhaps the Peckham levels have been converted. There is definitely a redevelopment plan, but some of them more, let's get rid of the whole thing. Others a bit more sensitive about retaining it. Obviously, we agreed to do this chat some time ago now, John, but events have caught up with us because literally last week the car park has been closed because some of the concrete has crumbled on the inside.
I don't think we need to take responsibility for that.
I don't think it's cause. No. I mean, I was down in Worthing the other week and I moved my chisel, obviously, but no, a bit like, but
some light English.
But I think, there are many sort of extraordinary, Owen Luder's Trinity car park, one of the most famous ones for its appearance in Get Carter, demolished in 2010. And you sort of feel with lots of these things is that in those cases, same with the Tricorn Centre in Portsmouth, which he was also responsible for. As far as I can tell, the Grafton Street seems to have been the work of the local planners and architects. I can't seem to find a name for who actually designed it, but it's sort of just at the point that these buildings get interesting again. They're on this cusp point between them being demolished, and Worthing has a strange idea of itself as this Victoriana place, and which it isn't really. A lot of it is very interwar, to be honest. I mean, another building I love in this part of the country, because I went there again as a child, is the library at Lancing, which is again one of those. When we're moving out of the concrete brutalist into the brickwork period of the middle 70s, and it's a wonderful cuboid brick library building of the classics in a municipal style. I think really it's just the casualness with which the word eyesore is used as well, that there's something intrinsically ugly about this building, and to me there isn't really. I think it's a quite interesting. I mean, it may not be quite as striking or interesting as the recently lost Welbeck car park, which had a beautiful sort of tessellated concrete facade, but I still think the facade on this is rather friendly, actually. Oddly enough, I think I said when I sent you a photograph of it, there was a coach parked in front of it, a sort of double-decker bus, which had parked outside. And in some respects, the windows or the openings on the fascia of the car park are a bit like that. It looks like it could be like, two coaches or something or other from the 1970s.
Yeah, those lozenge-shaped openings, they do create this sort of amazing repetitive pattern all the way along, don't they? And also, one of the things I think is very interesting about the building, as with the Get Carter car park, was that there are multiple uses for this. So the car park is sort of plugged into part of a development of shops. It also has got an interesting kind of sky bridge going on.
Yeah, and also next door to it, sort of built into the complex, is a bowling alley. which, again, without getting too nostalgic about it, was where in the early 80s, when would-be mods would go in there and with old like 99p plimsolls and then put the plimsolls in and get the bowling shoes and then walk out with the bowling shoes to have the Paul Weller style that was that. And
amazing.
And I think bowling as well. The bowling alley itself is one of those classic late 60s, early 70s dreams of a slightly American dream, I suppose, as car parks are to a certain extent.
Yeah, and they could sort of, this car park has sort of come about following 1963. We've got the Buchanan Report, Traffic in Towns, which is all about helping architects and planners and politicians get their head around, what do we do about cars? Yeah. Oh my God, cars are ruining towns. What do we do with them? And then every town has got to kind of work out what to do with cars. They don't really know quite what to do, and they've all got to come up with their own solutions. And he has this whole menu of different stuff you can do. And I guess in places like Worthing, this idea of kind of like placing the car park like on the seafront, partly it sort of gets it out of the way, doesn't it? It's interesting that you mentioned Hastings earlier, because Hastings has got a lot of that kind of development where the town in Hastings slightly turns its back on the sea in a way and doesn't quite look at the sea. And Worthing does look at the sea a lot more and is engaged much more with its beach. But it's interesting that at that point they decide that the car park, it's fine, we can put it there because it's sort of out of the way. It's not really kind of interrupting anything because the pier is a bit further down. The bit you feel on the beach, you're not really going to look back necessarily at the car park. It's almost sort of hidden in plain sight.
I mean, also, if you were coming into Worthing until about coming out when they knocked it down again at Teevil Gate, which is just by the station. There used to be a big multi-storey car park and shopping centre there, which has come down, and that formed that rather classic road structure you get in post-war planning, where there's the station, there's a car park by the station, and there's a ring road. So you can either park your car in the idea you then go into the town, maybe on a bus or something, or you can just walk down. Or if you're going out of town, you park the car there and you go off to commute somewhere else. All of these are indicative of what was felt was likely to happen. Or it was happening, that, as you quite rightly say, with the Buchanan, Traffic in Towns report and stuff, that it was going to be about mobility via motor vehicles, and it was going to be about leisure and shopping. And you would have, these luxury flats above the shopping centre in Worthing, probably with, some of them having sea views, if you're lucky. and similarly, the Knightsbridge house flats next to the Grafton Street car park are above a Marks and Spencer's. It's not any kind of shopping mall. It's or Sainsbury's or Gateway or whatever it was. Fine Fair or whatever at the time. It's always been a Marks and Spencer's. So there was an element of discernment and in fact it's called Knightsbridge House. Sort of implies a certain normative determinism about the people who would be living in this swanky modern block by a car park. In a way, it's like a precursor to our contemporary London issue of having the hub, where you've got like the Tesco Metro, the flats over the top, and the overground station. It's those kind of combinations of transport, leisure, and shopping kind of built into it.
Yeah, and for the economy of a town like Worthing, it's really important to try and get tourists in, to get shoppers in, to get people kind of using that stuff, spending their money. So the car park would have been seen as a really important part of that whole business plan for how you make the centre of a seaside resort like Worthing work. And much as a lot of the identity of the town is built up around Jane Austen's Sanditon and the importance of being earnest, it's equally a bit of Harold Pinter there as well. We've got Harold Pinter writing their Homecoming. Its identity is built up around a lot of this impressive cultural heritage, but actually that heritage continues, and it's a sort of modern heritage as well. And in a way, the building's a reminder that Worthing doesn't stop.
No.
Look, it doesn't get kind of trapped in aspect like some towns, even though I imagine that when you were growing up there, it probably did feel a bit like it happened.
It did. As I've said, I've besmirched it in print by saying it's hard to grow up somewhere where most other people have gone to die. The building actually that Wilde stayed in got demolished to make way for a petrol station. So the kind of Pinter's home is still there and still looks very, it's very elegant. double-fronted Regency place, which very in a kind of quite quiet sort of back street, not just near Ambrose Place. And in some respects, the use of the car park had with this Levels restaurant, and it was painted bright colours for a bit as well, but that seems to have gone the way of the flesh, whether it's washed
Much
off.
too dangerous.
Yeah, washed off. But the Levels thing seems to me a good sort of version of a reinvention of it by turning it into a bar restaurant place and using what was a outside parking deck area as a terrace opposite the sea, and you retain. I still think the elegance of the building. Elegant might be overstating it, but certainly the strikingness of the building. And I think also, given some of the things that have replaced the buildings that were there, where the Wine Lodge pub, which is the other side of the car park, there's a ersatz Georgian block, and where the Art Deco hotel, there's also another rather predictable modern take on a Deco-ish block. I mean, there are some other more interesting modern buildings a bit further east along the front, but I think it's more a failure to see the value in something which is already there. Actually, admittedly, structurally, if it's unsound, but it strikes me as it looks like one of those cases of everyone is desperately hoping it would crumble away in some way or other, or wasn't really willing to fight for it to be retained in that way. I mean, I may be besmirching people. Maybe there are people who are, were very genuinely fond of it and generally did want it to succeed or it to be reborn. But even from an environmental perspective, in a way that there's a nice, almost a form of poetic justice in the idea that something like this, which housed motor cars, could be remade, therefore not increasing the carbon footprint of knocking it down and building something else.
You never quite know how long things are going to last or not last, do you? And even though it's sort of death knell has been pealing out over the town, it might actually still remain for several years.
I wonder if some of this is also obviously new retirees arrive in places, and some of the bits that they value, certain forms of tea shops, a certain form of gentility, shall we say, that they associate with the seaside. And an urge that, in order to change, it needs let's get rid of this old thing and have something new. That you end up doing the worst of both worlds in a way. You introduce something that's a bit half-hearted and a little bit underwhelming, really, and not as interesting as something that's already there.
This is a building that's got lots of different uses. We've got kind of alleyways, a sky bridge. We've got all these different levels. There are sort of different ways to kind of cut through it. And in a way, it's representing the sort of disreputable kind of hidden alleyways side of the seaside that does get cleaned up and polished away. And, we see that happening in all the sort of more shishy seaside towns, where, regardless of what the building was or what its purpose was, it ends up being, as you say, a tea room or a kind of one of those weird shops that sells expensive things that you don't really know what they are.
Quite so.
That was a fascinating trip around Worthing. But your next choice, I can't help thinking, seems to be in direct opposition to that car park. I noticed it while I was stuck in the boot, and this record bag kept banging against me. And I had a look at the cover, and my word, what on earth is this, Travis?
Well, it is Bo Hanson's Music Inspired by Lord of the Rings, which is a prog-tastic album from, I think it was actually recorded in 1970, but released in the UK in 1972. And as it says, Bo Hanson was a keyboard player predominantly, though we may have played other instruments, who was in a Swedish duo called Hanson and Carlson. And he played Hammond organ, and Carlson played the drums, and they were a kind of jazz fusion duo. They played with Jimi Hendrix a few times. Jimi Hendrix actually recorded one of their songs tax-free.
Is that the song, or was that just how he recorded
it? Possibly. I don't know which was. Perhaps he was in exile on the Isle of Man at the time, wasn't it? But Hanson became fascinated by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and I I didn't even see the Peter Jackson movies. I exercised my inner orc, if ever I had one, sort of around about the arrival of puberty. I certainly read the books when I was read them at school. We got them out of the library, etc. But I don't have a great deal of tolerance for Tolkien stuff. But this particular album, I first heard bits of it on the soundtrack of Lucas Moodysson's 2000 film, Together.
Which is one of the best films ever made.
It's an absolutely lovely film. For those who don't know, it involves a commune in outside Stockholm, where the sister of one of the commune members has broken up with her husband, and they come to the commune and becomes a slightly destructive force on the commune, but it ends very charmingly. SOS by ABBA is used rather evocatively in it as well.
I mean, it destroys you, that ending, doesn't it? I mean, it's too much. It's amazing.
And but also scattered through it were bits from Lord of the Rings, this Bo Hansen album, Leaving Shire and the Black Riders and the Flight to the Ford. And I think
I should point out that the rustling that you can hear is Travis excitedly holding the album.
Put it down and stop rustling.
No. It's nice to have the excitement.
I just like, what is this? It's incredible music. It's haunting, eerie sounding. Right? Recorded. Some of it was recorded on, or certainly was rehearsed, and some of the tracks were laid down on some obscure island off Stockholm called Algo, I think it was called. Pronunciation may vary depending on which part of the world whether it has an umlaut on it or not, which I can't remember. It's simple isn't quite the right word for it. I think the word is spare. The sound of it is spare. Lots of Moog synthesizer bits, an organ, a quite primitive sounding tom-tom drum sounds on it, and if I'm honest, to me it doesn't instantly invoke Lord of the Rings. I tend to think of that as being a bit more clanking swords, flying stuff. I don't know why flying stuff, but I don't know. It doesn't.
No, that was exactly what I thought as well when I heard it. I thought this was not what I was expecting, something more kind of heroic sounding, and instead it's quite spooky and melancholy and eerie.
Yeah,
and I suppose it kind of encapsulates that side of it rather than the kind of. It's not the plot. No, it's like the mood, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think obviously Hansen, writing it on this Swedish island, I think also feeds into it. So that I mean, even that melancholy you get in some ABBA songs, particularly Agnetha, the blonde one, always had this extraordinarily sort of haunted expression on her face, and even in that hologram show, the posters for that, her face still looks as if there's some sort of trauma that's in the background.
Even de-aged.
Yeah, exactly. This is the era of 1972. It comes out on the Charisma label, which at that time is home to Genesis and the like. So Tony Stratton Smith, who runs the label, sort of rather a bon vivant character. He writes the sleeve notes to the English edition, which came out in 1972. And I think there's just something, it fits in with that, a lot of that prog stuff. But what it doesn't really do, it doesn't do noodly. It's not like tons and tons of trills of solos or anything like that. It's quite subtle in that respect. I mean, there are some strange noises which sound like creatures on a few of the tracks as well. But the mood mostly is one of as you say, haunted melancholy. The Grey Havens, the final track on it, and the Black Riders and the Flight to the Fjord has a kind of great pace to it, a very beaty drum beat. And again, all the organ and synth sounds have that sort of glide in and out. A couple of them sort of run backwards or sound like they're playing backwards, and it's all instrumental as well. There's no vocals on it apart from the odd strange sort of chirpy noise here and there. Apparently, this was partly. It had originally planned to have some singing on it, but the Tolkien estate refused them any permission to use any of the lyrics and things. So that went by the wayside, really.
There we are. That's happened to so many musical projects
Well,
over the years,
David
hasn't it?
Bowie in 1984, most famously, when he wanted to do a musical based on that.
Kate Bush with Essential World.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a soundtrack for some film, a completely different film. Like it's more in that Pink Floyd vein of prog.
Yes.
Things like the Obscured by Clouds albums. It's in that vein, but without lyrics. So this was done obviously a lower budget, and I think that's also why I think it still sounds interesting now. It still has a freshness to it because it is a bit bedroom. It's not entirely bedroom. They did go into a studio and hammer it out after. There are some session musicians, another drummer called Carlson, but apparently I had to check he's not the same Carlson who was in Hansen and Carlson. Runa Carlson apparently plays drums on it. And then the cover work, which is by an artist called Jane First, has a hand, with a ring in its palm and some bat-like creatures and a strange figure in the clouds here and some fairy-like creatures and God knows what else going on.
None of whom they could name for copyright.
No, exactly. Reasons. Yeah, it's like the joke about it looks like Godzilla, but not Godzilla from the Austin Powers thing. But I mean, after that, he made several albums after that, including the follow-up album was called Magician's Hat, which had songs implied by Alan Garner's Elidor.
Amazing.
And then we got to Attic Thoughts, which has one track on this that is inspired by Watership Down. And then there's a further album after this, which was a full album based on Watership Down, which I don't own for some reason, although I do have somehow or other, as I found when I was hunting around the rack for records, I seem to have 2 copies of each of these 2.
Oh.
So Attic Thoughts and Magician's Hat. So
there we are.
If anyone wants to message me to sell them, then yes. But I only have one.
That may be half the stock of worldwide of one of those.
Exactly. So music inspired by the Lord of the Rings, or by Lord of the Rings. Actually, doesn't have the, which I think was originally Sagan om Ringen, which is the Saga of the Ring was the original Swedish title. And got released in England. It did reasonably well actually over here. It didn't do. 1972 was the year of Ziggy Stardust, but also high prog. So I think sixth former at that time wasn't walking around with a thumbed copy of Lord of the Rings in their satchel.
This album was released over here about 4 years after the car park was put up.
Yeah.
So I feel like the album is kind of representing the Shire, and meanwhile the car park not so much.
I mean, I guess topographically, the thing about Worthing, or when I come out of the station and walk up into Broadwater towards my parents' house, the thing that I am always reminded of when I go back there is that the downs are there. It's this enormous kind of enveloping. It's like a big, I don't know, an arm or around a shoulder almost is how the downs appear above the town. So maybe the Shire is the downs, and also in Sisbury Ring is up there. So there is that side of this location that Chantry Ring and Sisbury Ring, these quite odd places in terms of them being Iron Age hill forts, but also I remember my dad driving us up to Chantry Ring, I think it was, to watch a meteoroid shower. And while we were driving up, there was all these people in masks and big capes and stuff wandering up doing some pagan stuff up on Chantry Ring. So it has that side to it, I guess, as well.
I must say that when I was listening to the album, it sort of evoked 1970s schools programs slightly. There was a lot of use of that kind of instrumentation and that kind of sensibility in programs that weren't about a sort of epic quest, but were more about somebody looking for a peregrine falcon in Basingstoke or something like that. So it kind of, there's an element of the album that sort of slightly spoke to that.
I think it's that hybrid thing, isn't it? The folktronica thing that you get in the 1970s, where it's a bit radiophonic, but also the folk police are involved. Children of the Stones, things like that. It's ancient, but also eerie in a space age way. I mean, I think this whole thing about, I suppose the connecting point for me, if I think about it really, is that I always think of the correlation you get in the early 1970s between the speaker stack the tower block and the megalith, and how those things kind of interact with one another in the iconography. There's famous photographs of Hawkwind playing underneath the Westway with their big speakers beside them, so that their equipment looks like Stonehenge, and they're playing it underneath something that's almost like the modern version of the Stonehenge. So I think those things are probably connected as well. So maybe I'm arguing in a way that the car park needs to be preserved like an ancient monument of Stonehenge. It's like a symbol of decadent ruination of late 20th century capitalism and car ownership. It's actually a big beacon symbolising the death of British Leyland. Or it should be,
and what is
it should be filled with mini metros, with their talking computers.
Amazing choices. Thank you, Travis. They were wonderful. Where can people find out more about your writing?
I have a website. I think it's just traviselborough.co.uk. I'm probably on other platforms, but I'm not a massive social media user. I do have an Instagram account and Facebook and things, but I have to say I've never quite got my head around it either. I still have photographs that I post on Flickr. So that's how old school, nice. How sort of curiously analog one is about this thing. Posting photographs taken by film cameras on a digital platform, which is now almost antique, I think, possibly.
It's like one step on from putting them in a newsagent's window.
Precisely.
I think.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, lovely. Thank you so much, Travis. Enjoy your next trip to the car park.
I will.
And I look forward to listening now to Watership Down.
Yes.
That's my next adventure. Thank you very much. Ta-ra.
Tell me the things that you loved before Monstrosities.
Thank you so much for listening. Monstrosities Mon Amour was created, presented and edited, no really, by John Grindrod. The theme tune is by Lorna Rees and Rufus Rees-Kashan, and the logo by Richard de Passando. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to my Substack. Allez tout droit!